Right. Well, good evening. I did give you an opportunity to get those second sets of biscuits, teas and coffees, and many of you have taken that opportunity. Well done. As I say, you won't get another opportunity for about an hour or so now. I'm just going to run through some announcements about how this evening was planned to work, whilst people are just, some late arrivals are just coming in. So welcome. Good evening. Thank you to you all for coming out this Tuesday evening. This is I've lost track of where we even are. Well, this is the 7th, the penultimate of eight Kingston Conversations. So this is the 7th one, and I know where I am. We're in Surbiton, we're in the Crescent, and it's going to be a great evening if the ones we've had to date are anything to go by. So we've been doing these events across the borough now throughout September and going into October, and each one is being hosted by the leader of the council, Kevin Davis, who you'll hear from him in a moment. My name's Dean Tyler. I'm one of the officers at Kingston Council. I'm the lead for the partnerships work that we do down there at the council. But this evening, I'm chairing tonight's debate. So if anyone's seen Question Time, and Jonathan Dimbleby, he does it properly. So we'll see how that goes. In a few moments, I'm going to hand you over to councillors Kevin Davis and Terry Payton, who are going to say a few words on why we're having these events, and also talk about some of the plans the council's got over the coming years. And what they say will be fairly short, I can assure you, because the most important part of these conversations has been your opportunity to get your points of view across. That's what we're here for tonight. So it's important that you have that opportunity. So how's it going to work? First, Kevin and Terry are going to speak initially. After that, we're going to go straight into taking questions. And Councillor Andy Johnson, that's right, we've swapped around who's doing what. Andy Johnson's also on the panel. Okay, so my job this evening is to try and ensure that anyone who wants to speak has an opportunity to do so. So what we've learned from doing 6 of these so far is that people do come along to these events because they do want to get their point of view across, and that's really important. What we've also found is that some people have had 4, 5, or 6 questions that they want to ask, and some people have made quite long speeches, actually, which have been really very, very interesting. But it hasn't helped everybody else in the audience get their point of view across. So when we do come to the question part, can I ask you to really work with me on this? If you've got more than one question, can you just prioritize the top thing you want to get across? Try and be brief. And I'll also encourage the councillors to be brief in their responses as well, so we can get through as many of you as we possibly can. That's my main objective this evening. Okay. After about 45 minutes of that, I'm going to draw that Q&A part of the evening to a close, because there's a final really important part of these events, which has been an opportunity to talk to the councillors that are present on a one-to-one basis. And we've also learned from doing these events that many people actually prefer to have an opportunity just to have a conversation individually with a councillor rather than put their hand up in a room like this. So there's an opportunity for you to do that as well towards the end of the evening. Of course, not everybody will know their ward councillor or their local councillor. So I want to give the councillors who are here present in the front row just to stand up and introduce themselves, so you know when we get to that bit of the evening who to go and have a chat with. So can we start on the left there?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Diane White, and I'm one of your St Mark's Ward councillors. I live in the ward, obviously, down the road here. I work in the borough as well for a local voluntary organisation, and I'm delighted to meet you all this evening.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and normally called as Jogan, but I'm Councillor Jogan Jogannathan of St Mark's Ward, and I've been with you since 2002 to date. So if you have anything, please come along and talk to me. Thank you.
Hello, and I'm Liz Green. I'm also St Mark's Ward, and for those of you who aren't sure which ward you might be in, this is St Mark's Ward. It is central Surbiton, some of the river roads, and goes down Villiers Avenue around the Burnley area and that sort of place.
Officers as well. I think Gary and Gemma.
Good evening, I'm Gary Walsh. I'm the lead for communities at Kingston Council.
And good evening, my name's Gemma Gallant and I'm Neighbourhood Manager for Surbiton.
So any other councillors present this evening? Nope? Okay, good. You've all in the front row. A couple of very quick housekeeping points. For those of you that aren't familiar with this building, there are ladies and gents' toilets just as you walk in. And there are disabled facilities just behind me here. We're also streaming these events over the internet, and people have been watching them online, those that haven't been able to come along to the events in the evening. So for that reason, as well as using the microphone so that everybody else in the room can hear you, if you can hold the microphone quite close to your mouth when you're asking a question, we can pick that up on the sound, and then it's live streamed. The other advantage of that, of course, is you can also, if you've asked a question, go back and watch yourself. Again and again and again, because you'll be immortalised on our website for that. I've been watching myself back each time I've done this, and I've been trying to think how I could improve each time. So you should have seen me the first time. Finally, feedback forms on your desk. If you haven't sat on those feedback forms, do use those. Tell us what you liked about this evening. Tell us what you didn't like about this evening, because we will be doing more of these kinds of things, and there's no good us keep doing it like this if it's not working for you. So let us know what you think about it. I'm not told that there's a fire alarm this evening, but if there is, I'm standing right by the fire exit. I'll be leaving briskly, and you will be following me in an orderly fashion. And there's another one by Joe there, who's also standing at the back. Enough, I think you'll say, from me. Let's hand over to the leader of the council. Please join me in welcoming Councillor Kevin Davis. Kevin.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming along this evening. It's been a great pleasure, actually, meeting so many people at our evening events. In fact, we seem to get more come along during weekday evenings than we do on a Saturday morning, which is one of the things we're learning from this, which I think when we come back to you and in the future, I think it's something we need to take account of. So thank you for coming along this evening, and I hope it's entertaining. But I also hope it's informative. That's really part of what this is about. It's about us, each of us, trying to get to know each other. I'm going to speak briefly about three issues which, in my view, are some of the most important things that the council is facing over the next few years. They're not unique to Kingston. They apply to many local authorities. They particularly apply to local authorities in London, who have some very specific problems which they're going to have to deal with over the next few years. The first of those issues is, in a sense, what we're doing tonight. It's about the communications between us and people who live in the borough. I mean, as councillors, we clearly all live here anyway, and we are all residents, number one, but we are elected to represent you. And I think it's becoming a view widely accepted across local government that the methods by which we've engaged with communities in the past are no longer fit for purpose. And we do have to find new ways of engaging with people, communicating with them, communicating what we're doing and what we plan to do, but then also getting from them as much information as we possibly can about their views. Take them into consideration. Sometimes ignore them, because we need to take a decision that is different to the view that you may hold. But in that process, I hope that the conversation we have, the iterative process, the to and fro between us, means that even though we may disagree and take a different decision, you at least feel you've been engaged in the debate that we're having. And I've sensed for some time, last year I'd say, that actually a lot of residents don't feel they're engaged with what the council does. They do feel detached to it. They do feel that councils tend to do things to people as opposed to do things with people. And no more obvious a place is that is when we actually consult, where we always seem as a council to tell you what we're going to do and then ask your view as to whether you like it or not. And I think the future isn't like that. I think the future is this type of conversation, whatever other form of engagement we look to try and implement over the next few years, to move away from dry meetings where we take strange decisions with strange rules, to literally just having a conversation with the people that live here about the things that they value and the things they want to preserve. So that's the first issue which we've come to talk to you about, and in a sense it's a very simplistic one, but it's something with a lot of detail to it. So how do we talk to you, engage with you, consult with you, and actually have a relationship with you between a council and the people that live in a borough. First issue. The second issue is a much more complicated one, and one which you may or may not be aware of, which is the issue of growth and what we do about growth in Kingston. We've been having quite a lot of debate in the council about growth, and it's also something we've now got to really talk to you about as people that live here. And why is this an issue? Well, we are growing. I mean, London is growing at a spectacular rate. In the early part of this year, there was a celebration held at City Hall by the mayor, a small party for the celebration. It's imaginative. There was a celebration of a new figure that had been reached for the population of London. London's population at that point, early this year, went back to 8.6 million people living in the city. The previous time the population had been at that peak was in 1939, just before the war. And obviously since then, since that period until the sort of mid-70s, late 70s, the population declined quite dramatically. The Luftwaffe had a bit of a role in it, but there are other things that happened as well. Principally, and this is actually one of the reasons why our population is growing again, principally it was because people started to move out of the city. They felt a better quality of life out of the city. They retired out of the city. Now, we've got back to that 1939 figure back in February of this year, and all the projections that we are now seeing in all the planning that's being done across London is that our population by 2050, seems some time off, but 2050 will grow to about 11 million in London. The effect of that is that here in Kingston, because we cannot be immune from it, is that our population will grow as well. As it happens, in the last 10 years, we've grown 11%. We've accommodated that by extending into our roofs, putting extensions on the rear, the side. Some people have even gone down, although that's more common in the centre of London than it is out here. But we have managed to accommodate it. And we've seen classroom expansions at our schools. We've seen our GP surgeries filling up with more and more patients than have ever been on the rotas for doctors. Our hospital is constantly stretched. Our A&E is always at capacity. And if anybody's ever tried to get on the 6:32 out of Surbiton in the morning, it's pretty hell. So we have accommodated this, but, and I hope you will agree with me on this, it's unlikely we can accommodate it any further. That any further expansion in population has really got to be managed and controlled and shaped if we can at all do that. And that's not just about houses, because it will include house growth. If you take a population that we've now got in Kingston of about 165,000, by 2050 it's anticipated that will be up around 215,000. That's possibly somewhere between, because that's 34% growth, possibly somewhere around about 20,000 plus extra houses in the borough. So it's a very, very big issue for us. It's one we do have to talk to you about, because we have to understand where you think we can do this and how we can accommodate it. And it's going to be a significant issue for some time to come, because laid on top of all that is equally a changing demographic in this town, which we've not seen in the past, which is that more and more people are no longer moving away and going to Dorset and living in chocolate boxes in retirement, the thatched cottage and all that. They're actually staying in the borough, retiring in the borough, downsizing into some of the flats that have been built in the town centre. And that seems the pattern of life which we're going to see growing as people live longer and longer and longer. Surround yourself in care. Don't isolate yourself in a retirement home in the country. So there are some significant changes in that. So that's the first two, is how are we going to communicate with each other in the future? What are we going to do about the growth agenda which is coming at us? The third one is, if we had enough problems to cope with, is actually also critical to us, because in that growth agenda it's a problem for us. And that's our budget. Now, our budget, sadly, is only going one way. By 2018, the council will be spending 45% less than it was in 2010. Now, if any of you run a business that sees your income, your sales go down by not far off half, you can imagine the sort of impact that will have upon the council. Now, in the past, we've done very well at coping with this. You know, we have to be clear, we have coped with reductions in budget. They've been going on for very many years, actually. It's not something just that suddenly happened in 2010. We've faced similar issues in the past. So we've coped with it till now, but the issue is that if you keep just salami slicing bits of the budget, if you keep knocking 5% off everything we do, the reality is that at the end of that process, everything's rubbish. And we don't deliver any services of quality or anything that you as residents would appreciate as being the best that we can get for the very large sums of council tax that you pay. So that third conversation is about what we're going to do in the future with our budget. And the only conclusion we can come to is that we are going to have to stop doing some things. And the decisions we make are what those things that we're going to stop doing are. And part of this conversation that we want to have, and it won't stop tonight, it will continue, is what's important to you? What are the things that you think a council can deliver that should be delivering for the money you get, you pay rather? What should we be delivering? And what can we have a new negotiation over? What are the things that we can talk about which actually maybe the community needs to step into the space that the council has done in the past? So there we go. Long agenda, not much time. How are we going to communicate? What are we going to do about the growth? And what are we going to do about a new council of the future that has a lot less money to spend in the context of all that growth? What I'm going to do now is just going to hand you over to Terry, who's just going to talk you through one of the things that we've been doing recently, which is around the Cleaner Kingston campaign, which some of you may have seen around, but I'll hand it to Terry and he can fill you in a few of the details, just to give you some ideas about some things that might work.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Terry Payton, as we said. I'm the Chair of New Malden's Neighbourhood Community, and I became Chair of the Residents Committee in July this year. I hope by now you have seen the Cleaner Kingston campaign messages. They highlight you wouldn't do this at home, would you? The messages are deliberately provocative to grab your attention. They do make a serious point. Littering, including spitting, cigarette butts, chewing gum, dog fouling and street urination, are all parts of the behaviour that we are highlighting. We do have a clean borough, but we want a pristine borough. We cannot achieve this alone, and throwing more money at street cleansing is no longer an option, as Kevin has made very clear. We simply do not have the finances for that. The all-in-one survey showed us that clean streets were a top priority for 9 out of 10 of you, but just 6 out of 10 of you are actually satisfied with how clean the streets are. If we all work together, we can achieve a behavioural change. We can save money cleaning up the streets, which will be better spent on other essential services. Waste and recycling is another service which really matters to us all. In the beginning of next year, we'll be making some changes to how we deliver this service. These changes will save money, and they will help us all to recycle more. The new service will not put huge demands on us, but we will need to make some changes to the way we organise our recycling. We'll be asking everyone to play their part to help the council do things more efficiently. The changes should save around £4 million. More information about the changes will follow soon. The service is due to start in early 2016. This is one of a number of changes that we simply have to make if we are to manage the massive financial challenges the borough faces in the coming years. Once again, the key to our success will be the council and residents of this borough working together. Kevin has already said the world for local government has changed forever. Securing our futures and the futures for our borough is going to require all of us to work together in a way that we simply have not done before. We will answer as many questions as honestly as we can tonight. This is the start of a better relationship between residents, the council, as we tackle the future together. Thank you.
Marvellous. Okay, thanks very much to the councillors for those introductions. I said they'd be brief. Hopefully you've been thinking about some questions during those introductions. I believe one member of the audience submitted a question in advance. Lynn Finity? You are here. Mark, would you like to kick us off? Is that all right? Yes, okay. Bring the microphone straight to you. If you wouldn't mind just standing up and saying who you are and... Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name's Lynn Finnerty. I actually live in New Malden but couldn't make the New Malden one, but mine's a very general question to do with the borough. I won't make a speech, but I need to say why I'm asking the question, otherwise it won't really make sense. It's about air quality, and it's in the context of public health and pressure on services that you, Kevin, mentioned. I'm aware that the council is about to consult on a revised air quality action plan. This actually prompted my question, as the content of the draft for consultation is basic, in my opinion, and limited, and hasn't moved on. I understand air pollution is a national issue, and the council's aims should be realistic and achievable, but there are mitigating measures that could be introduced that don't seem to be in that plan. There's more that could be considered around school education and planning. In the interest of joined up thinking, someone needs to take ownership of the issue to ensure all departments and committee decisions do not work in isolation. For instance, a 6-year green space strategy was adopted this year, going up to 2021, and its tree strategy contains 27 separate policies. Not one refers to planting species most suitable regarding air quality. So my question is, why is Kingston Council continuing with a blinkered approach to air quality management? Would looking at the problem holistically not be more effective, and also put the council in a better position regarding eligibility for grant funding? Because I do know that there was opportunity to bid for the mayor's funding, and we couldn't because the plan was just, well, it was very poor. Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thanks so much for that. I mean, I have a very robust view about air quality. I think our air quality is declining pretty badly. I've lived in the borough, I was born in New Malden, brought up in Old Malden, live in Surbiton now. And I actually have to say I actually felt the first time this summer that air quality was declining. In fact, I wasn't even sure whether it was just my lungs packing up as I got older, to be honest with you. But you could, for the first time, not quite taste it, but actually feel something different happening in the early part of this summer. So I am very clear about the fact we do have to do something about air quality. And I take the point about the strategy. I think it's actually quite limited, as often these strategies are. But I think there are other things that need to be done which to do with air quality, because, of course, one of the problems with air quality is it's a bit like climate change. We can do what we need to do about climate change, but unless the Chinese get off their backsides and do something, we're going to get nothing actually is going to change globally in the world. So the reality is that we can do things, but unless we can get others to cooperate with us as well, who sit around us, then we actually are not going to get as much done as we possibly hope we will. So there is a bit of work to be done with other boroughs on this, but that won't change what we can do. So we are in the process, and in fact we've now decided to bring it forward. It's a very boring subject, but I'll try and make it as brief as possible. A lot of what happens in terms of air quality can be dealt with through the planning process, and using planning strategy is the way of doing that. Now, whenever we have a planning application, it has to be judged against a planning policy. So it's my view that we need to build a lot more robust planning policy around this, particularly around things like green roofs, water harvesting, those sorts of things, which some of those aren't going to affect air quality, but they're all part of the same picture. Even though central government has said we should be removing those restrictions from developments and shouldn't be pursuing those particular things. One of the other things is that we've got two, in my view, hotspots in the borough, which are very significantly a problem. One of those is behind the back of Kingston Station, in that North Kingston area. There's a very significant issue there about air quality, and the monitoring picks that up. The other one is at Tolworth Broadway on the roundabout there, and that is a very serious problem we've got there. And we've clearly got to do more, in my view, about looking at not just the quality of the buildings that go up in terms of what they can contribute to doing more about air quality, but equally we ought to be looking at public realm schemes in those areas, because the more we can put public realm in, move cars off streets that people are in, the better will be our air quality. And one of the schemes, which constantly people say it's just a fantasy, but it's not a fantasy, One of the schemes we're discussing with the Mayor at the moment is about covering over the A3 at Tolworth. That is a real scheme. I'm hoping that we can start to see it advance quite quickly. It's a very, very expensive scheme, but it will transform the public realm and the air quality around that issue if we can actually just go some steps towards doing it. So in summary, our air quality strategy is not good enough. It is out for consultation, and it is there for consultation, and I think we've got to take it back and actually look at it and make it a bit more rigorous.
Okay.
Trees, I agree. Trees are actually vital to this. I mean, they really are. We have, unfortunately, this is not a political point, but we've inherited a very long period where we have simply not planted enough trees. We've had also quite a lot of trees that have died in the last few years. Don't get me started on Tolworth Broadway, because they die every 5 minutes in Tolworth Broadway. The Broadway, I'll tell you about it afterwards. I'm sure we can fill you in the details of that. But there's been quite a lot of honey fungus around as well in the last couple of years, which has destroyed quite a lot of trees. We currently have, if we carry on putting trees in at the rate in which we've been putting trees in for the last 10 years, it will take 21 years to replace all the trees that have died. And that is a very significant cost. Now, we are considering at the moment what we can do together with residents to try and make that change. Is there a way that we can share? I'm not suggesting it's a buy one, get one free, but is there some way that we can work together to replace tree pits with contributions?
I used to live in Kew Gardens, and the issue over there... Thank you.
I used to live in Kew Gardens, and the issue over there was people making driveways. As soon as they made driveways, of course they got rid of all the plants, but also the water just ran away. So, it was not good for the growth of what was left over. And I think that could be something that is going to come up here. There's no two ways about it. As, people don't want to pay parkers permits and stuff like that. They'll just use the front of the house. But that is a concern of mine, along with plenty of growth that we were talking about.
Thank you. Right, next question. I'm going to try and move around some other people first, sir, before I come back to you, if you don't mind. I'll just try the lady over here. Once I get to the people that have asked questions for the second and third time, I know it's time to move us into the breakout areas. But this lady, hello. Nice to see you. Old friends.
Do I have to say who I am?
Please do.
No, not particularly. Okay. My name's Karen Penny. I work in the local voluntary sector, and I also live in St Mark's Ward. There was one thing which isn't... I have got a question, but there was one thing that I thought I would comment on just very, very briefly. We're talking about communications and how to get feedback from sort of like the populace, as it were. Well, looking around me, and I do include myself in this, our demographic is not that representative of the borough, as in there aren't terribly many young people here, and there seem to be quite a lot when you go outside the door. So I would suggest that we need to improve our communications with people who are under my advanced decrepitude. Okay. My actual question, so sorry to deviate and hold up, but I was wondering what safeguards are in place to ensure the budget that's being cut from voluntary sector grants will be put back into the local voluntary sector, as opposed to large out-of-borough organisations, social enterprises, which could even involve, social enterprises could be AFC, for instance, Achieving for Children, for those of you not involved in my sector. So, we could be competing with the likes of Bernardo's and people like that coming in. And what safeguards have we got that those, because you say you want to improve sort of locality and us in the presumably voluntary and community sectors taking over things that the council can no longer do. So therefore, how are we going to do that when we don't actually necessarily have any funding? All right.
Yeah, sure. Let me deal with that. I mean, this is, for those who aren't aware of this particular issue, this is a move which is the council's being made. I mean, it's actually in common with quite a lot of councils now. We're moving away from a system where the voluntary sector is merely grant funded and given sums of money to actually commissioning them to provide a specific service that the council requires. So actually changing the nature of the whole thing. And it's an interesting issue which is causing, I know, some angst amongst the voluntary sector. I'm being open about it because I think it's true to say that any change is likely to lead to that. It's always the case that when we try to change the nature of what the relationship is going to cause some tension around it. I mean, the two or three issues I'd say about this is that I've been very clear that when we make that change, we've got to make sure that we are ready to deliver it in the timescale that we've set ourselves. If we're not, then we should step back and look at what else we can put in place until we are ready to deliver it, and that's a very important aspect of it. On the issue of the voluntary sector per se, I mean, the voluntary sector is an enormously important part of the scene of any borough, and it's particularly important in Kingston. And I'm not even saying that, sitting here saying that in the future we need them to do more, because we will inevitably have them doing more for us, because that is the nature of what we're going to do. But I think my perspective is always on it. It's about Kingston first. If there is a provider in Kingston that should be doing that piece of work for us, then why would we not contract with them? Why would we not work with them to commission that service?
When you're talking about commissioning, if you're looking at commissioning as commissioning should be done, legally speaking, you're actually looking at that and going on the London Tenders portal, and then that actually going out to anybody that wants to tender for it.
Yeah.
So anything that you put through will come up on the London Tenders portal, which means that anybody can bid for it. And you would actually be kind of acting illegally to prioritise. Do you see what I mean? That's my concern, is that because it's happened in Ealing, that the Thomas Forum came in and just decimated the local voluntary sector.
Yeah, I mean, for the vast range of services we commission, they are relatively small services that it's unlikely you're going to get any big organisations coming in to do it. I mean, I think the key ones are those very large strategic grants that are given to big organisations who provide services to us. And as I said, we've got to be very clear about our intentions around that. I mean, I think we need to go through the process and see what comes out of this round of commissioning, and then take some.
74,000 over 3 years that actually goes to full commissioning. So
Yeah, but that's a.
Yeah, but actually that much a year. When you're looking at the services that organisations such as the one I work for provide.
Yeah, that's a relatively large sum in the context of the wider grants that are given out currently to the voluntary sector. Yeah, exactly. It's a relatively large sum of money that, relative to everybody else. So, like most things, when a council takes a decision to do things, sometimes it has to say it's got things wrong. And if it has got it wrong, it needs to go back and look at that. And so what we're doing at the moment is moving forward with it as if we're going to implement this next April, as we said we would. And if there's a problem with it, you raise your eyebrows, I raise my eyebrows, because that's not very far away. Maybe they're not. And that's what we'd have to review at that point when we get to the situation. And I've been speaking very closely with Kingston Voluntary Action about this and saying, I want an open discussion about this. There's no them or us. Let's have an open discussion and find a way of working it through.
Okay, next question. Gentleman here. Hello, sir.
Good evening. I'm Douglas Reynolds. I used to live in Tolworth until 4 years ago, and I moved to St Mark's Hill. And I'm chairman of the Pensioners Forum. My reading at the moment of the how we apply for grants for the next year is more complicated than it was in the past. Why is that? Because the voluntary organisations, the last speaker said, are very important to this borough, and I'm wanting to know why it's going to appear to be more difficult to get grants in the future.
Well, there won't be a grant in the future. That's what the whole change is. So we are moving to a system where there will be a commission service from the Pensions Forum and other organisations as they want to do it. There is still a small sums of grants available for emerging needs, which, as things change, we recognise that suddenly there may be some things that we need to sort of push on and actually fund in its initial stages. But actually, the process is a process. I mean, it's like anything. I'm sure when the existing grant scheme came in and the process was put in place the first time, it was considered to be complicated and difficult, and we just have to work through that. And I think actually the officers of this council should be supporting all those voluntary sector organisations, ensuring that it's not as complicated as it appears it might sometimes be.
Good evening. My name is Rosalind Lewis and I live in Langley Road, but I've lived in the borough of Kingston for over 50 years. The concern I have hasn't actually come up this evening, but I know it's come up in the past, and that is affordable housing. Now, I know that we're doing quite a bit of building around Kingston, but sometimes one sees that the affordable housing is for people who I don't know who can afford it. When are we going to build affordable housing for nurses, for bus drivers, for people who cannot possibly have huge deposits? When I came to Kingston as a young married woman, my husband and I didn't have a huge deposit at all, very, very small, and we managed to get onto the ladder. And I really do feel that we must make some effort for people to get onto the ladder. Because looking around, I can't think that my grandchildren will ever be house owners unless we really do something about that. And I hope we will in Kingston.
I'm in complete agreement with you in everything you say. I mean, and I don't want to go on too long about this because it is a very complex and complicated subject around affordable housing, but I'll try and keep it as simple as I possibly can. The council has an affordable housing rate that expects from every development over a certain size, and that rate's currently set at 50%. That is never achievable in the current market, and it's not being achieved across London. It's significantly less in almost every borough in London at this current time. Now, the problems we have in Kingston they're not unique to Kingston, but they are a certain set of statistics that really don't help us in this particular endeavour around affordable housing. Kingston between 2011 and 2014 had the worst house building record in the country. Not just in London, just in the country. Now, anybody who did economics knows supply and demand leads only one way if you don't have enough supply, and that is that price starts to rise. And we've seen absolutely astronomical increases in prices in this borough, to the point where actually the sort of 2008-2009 recession really didn't affect house prices at all. There was a dip, but it was in no way immeasurable to that which went on in the rest of the UK. The consequence of that is that when it comes to affordable housing, the scheme which is currently in place for judging how much should be affordable is broken. It's broken across London. It doesn't work in any borough. It's based on what they call viability, where the developer pours into a pot how much the land cost, how much it will cost to build the housing, how much profit they'll make out of it, and then there's a residual sum which is then divided up amongst affordable housing, education provision, and a range of other issues that go with that housing. The consequence in Kingston is that we are very lucky. In fact, our average is about 19% affordable housing is what we achieve on developments across the borough in the last year. But there is an issue. Because you're absolutely right that in my view, there is no such thing as affordable housing. We have to be frank about this. If you are currently looking at a one-bed flat in the centre of Kingston at somewhere between £320,000, £340,000, which is what you are talking about at the moment, and affordable is judged as being 80% of that value, so 20% off it, there is nobody that's a nurse who can possibly come close to actually buying that home, because they'd have to be earning about £75,000 a year to even come close to actually getting a mortgage on it. So it is a massive, massive problem. What we're doing is trying to work across London to fix the broken viability scheme, but I fear it's going to need government intervention in that to try and make it work better in London. We're going to try and look at what we can do with affordable, but if we're going to get what I would term key worker housing, which is what I think you're really sort of addressing, we're going to have to be a bit more radical about that. So one of the things we are undertaking, and we've started work and it's progressing, is looking at borough-wide estates regeneration. So where we currently have housing estates, we are looking at their complete rebuild and demolition, because many of them were built in an era when council housing was not the best build that was ever made. I mean, if you look at places like the Cambridge estate, it is a concrete jungle, very, very badly planned. They were put up fast, non-standard building types, very expensive to maintain, damp, drafty. It doesn't matter what you do, however many bits of double glazing you put in, they're still damp and very difficult to maintain. So we do have something dramatic there. What we do know from the work that's been done so far, if you take somewhere like the Cambridge estate, it's currently got about 700 odd homes on it. Without actually making the homes smaller, with proper planning around public realm and parkland and gardens and things, we can get that up to about 1,200 homes on that site as a minimum. What we're going to do is say we are going to, as a council, build more council houses, because that's where we'll get much more impact from key workers and actually a better rate of return from the council itself, because actually councils are very, very good at borrowing money at very, very low rates, because we're a very safe bet, because we're very much secured on income that comes from people who are paying tax. So we've got the opportunity here. That's what we're pushing forward. There are 4 big estates in Kingston we're looking at, and I'm hopeful that we can actually massively increase our social housing. Final point on that, and just so you're very clear about this, and so to talk to you about the sort of crisis that is appearing in housing in Kingston. We currently have about just under 5,000 council-owned properties in Kingston. We didn't sell them off to a housing association or float them out. They are council-owned. I've got about over 8,000 people now on the waiting list to go into those council homes, and a churn of about 300 homes a year. So there are people on that list who will probably wait more than 2 lifetimes before they ever get the opportunity to have a council home. And I think we've got to do something about that. We've got to be honest about it and just actually try and do as much as we can to build more affordable homes ourselves, rather than depend on a broken system, which is what we've got at the moment.
Okay. Who would like to raise another question? I'm going to take a question, if I may, from this side of the room, because we haven't had one yet. That lady had a hand up there. And then,
my name is Anne Antridge, and I live in Grove Ward, and my question follows on from the previous one. We talk about housing and whether to build affordable housing and so on, and the population growth. I think most of us are aware that throughout the UK and in the London area in particular, there are millions of empty and unoccupied homes. A lot of that is in the residential sector, some in the retail and commercial sector, and much of it is suitable for being adapted to residential use. Building new homes can impact on green space and on the character of a borough. And I wonder what the council has done to survey and research the potential of unoccupied housing and suitable accommodation before it builds new homes.
Thank you. It's very interesting, actually. Only today I've been up at the Mayor's office talking about some of these issues we're talking about now. And we've recently, it's not been published yet, but it will be coming out very soon in draft form. We've recently completed something called a SMAR. It's a terrible sort of acronym, but it's actually a strategic, what they call a strategic market housing assessment, which does calculate much of what you're talking about. When we do a SMAR, we tend not to do it just within Kingston, because obviously Kingston as a borough has a slightly larger sort of corona around it of people who commute in and out of it, either for work or shopping or other such needs. So we do include not so much other London boroughs, but certainly places like Mole Valley, Dorking, Leatherhead within that SMAR. My understanding is that from the draft I've seen so far is that the unoccupied properties runs at under 2% of the stock, entire stock that we currently hold. To put that into context, under right to buy, whether you like it or not, we lose about 1% of our housing stock a year to that system. When it comes to land, I've been very clear with quite a lot of people about this, that my view is that you can't build more homes. I mean, building homes is one thing, and in fact the council doesn't really control much of that. I mean, the planning system, in a sense, while everybody feels we are all powerful as a council, the planning system doesn't really allow us to just turn around and say no all the time to developers. The other reality is, of course, we hardly own any land in the borough. We're not great landowners. It is mostly privately owned land, and obviously landowners at any time can put in applications for whatever they want on a piece of land. They'd be advised to try and make sure it matches policy if they want to get a permission to do the piece of work they're trying to do, but frequently they don't, but that's a different issue. What has happened is that the Mayor's office has woken up, and the government's now woken up as well. In fact, there's now a cabinet subcommittee in Whitehall, but equally the Mayor has set up something called the London Land Commission. Now, again, you won't be surprised to hear that actually, although I know as a council how much land I own where it is, I have no idea how much land is owned by the Health Service and where that is. I have no idea how much the MOD own. So I've not really got a great handle on other bits of land in the borough. The London Land Commission is there to try and draw all that together. And in fact, we've had some initial work done in Kingston, and we've identified, I think it's about 6,500 pieces of land which are available, which are publicly owned. But these aren't grass verges, but equally quite a lot of them are odd bits of land on the corners of roads that we had probably in 1880 or something or other. We just never did anything with it. So there are some odd things like that. In the wider view about where houses get built, the infrastructure we put in place to support that is what I think is critical. And I think most residents I speak to think is critical to this. It's fine saying, let's have more housing, but how the hell are we going to get about this place if we've got cars chogging up every road? So we've got to look at all this infrastructure picture as part of it. Equally part of that, in my view, is more parks. Because if we have more people and more development, we're going to need more green space, more public realm for people to socialise in, to walk around, to be human in. So all that has to be considered, and we can't just keep building and building and building on every bit of land we've got. We're going to have to use the stuff we're doing with the London Land Commission to identify new parkland, new things we can turn back to being publicly accessible for people. And one of those, I'll just briefly, is that I have already said that we will do everything we can to open up Tolworth Court Farm to more public access. We've got to be very careful. It's a very delicate place, Tolworth Court Farm. If you're not where it is, it's a very, very large site of land that we own the other side of Tolworth going towards Epsom. It's a beautiful old medieval farmland, in fact. But there's a huge history there which we should be opening up and sharing with people. So we've got some work to do around that. But it's that sort of thing I think we need to be proactively looking for, is places we can actually live.
A question here and then a question at
Hello, my name is Simeon Linstead. I'm a resident of Old Malden. My question is really about the first point, Kevin, that you made today about the conversation, the Kingston Conversation. And I completely agree with your point that the things need to move on in the way that politicians need to engage with the public. And to that effect, I think if the Kingston Conversation becomes very successful, it can be quite transformative for Kingston, have some amazing outcomes. So I'm all behind it. And what I'm keen to understand is what the future of the conversation is looking like, because we've got a nice Q&A session tonight. But what does that actually mean in terms of sort of ongoing engagement? There's a lady over there who mentioned about the fact we don't have that sort of younger group in here as well, which is a very good point. But so I want to just hear your thoughts about the future of it, and also how we can get involved, because we've all got opinions and thoughts and insights we can offer.
Yeah, I didn't pick up the young person's issue, and I'm sorry I didn't pick that up. I mean, this is a series of 8 conversations we're having at the moment, although frankly it's a bit more you questioning me and I just responding rather than a conversation. But we will move on from this. We will do different things. The young people is a very key part of it, and I think we're going to have to do specific conversations to try and get involved with some of those. I mean, I do visit schools myself, but I mean, we need to do it more formally and try and engage ourselves with people like the Youth Parliament and things like that. There's a number of things we're doing here. So after this conversation, or this series of 8, we're looking at how we present to you what our options are. I mean, I've talked about the budget, but how are we going to analyse whether the options we've come up with, things we want to stop, are viable or not, and whether people agree with us. As I said, we're not always going to agree, but at least I think we've got to come back to you and say, these are the types of things that frankly are on our list as things that are optional, and we're going to have to consider stopping them. So that's the next stage, I think, in this particular issue around the conversation. We do also have to look at the way, and this is another debate which is going on, about the way we contract services from organisations. I mean, we have a grass cutting contract which is currently in place, and I think we've got to look at a slightly fuzzier fit to that, so that actually where residents do want to take almost direct action themselves, then they actually have the ability to do so, rather than be squashed by a contractual relationship, which means you mustn't do that, because if you plant daffodils in your grass verge, then actually, to be fair, they don't often do this, but if you plant daffodils in your grass verge, they get mowed down by the first mower that comes along. They are fairly reasonable at that sort of thing, to be fair with you. I've learned the hard way here as well, because I mean, actually, I've looked at my grass verge outside my house, think it's a bit of a mess. And actually started throwing weed killer down to get rid of the weeds, because I think if I'm going to preach this to everybody else, I need to be a good example, and otherwise I'll get the Surrey comment on my door saying, why haven't I done it? So, but anyway, I think that's the type of relationship. This slightly more flexible relationship is something we've got to do. Now, to try and make that easy, as I said, I'm less interested, really very less interested, in councillors and councils having very, very dull, arcane meetings in rules of procedure which nobody can understand or actually relate to. We have to take decisions in a formal way, because otherwise somebody comes along and tries to take us to court sometimes. But I don't want us having meetings that nobody turns up to, because I'm bored with that. I've sat in too many meetings with nobody there, and still we spend an hour and a half discussing something or other instead of just getting on with our lives. This type of thing is more important. So we have now said to neighbourhood committees, you have one in Surbiton, that actually our expectation is they'll start to hold this type of event around specific issues they think are important. So it could be elderly care, or it could be GP surgeries or parks, or whatever it is, whatever the issue is they think is a burning issue for that neighbourhood, that locality, engage with the residents, have a discussion about it, and from that form a plan about what you may or may not do. Equally, we've said that in specific wards, so you all live in a ward and there are 3 councillors in a ward, we want to see councillors and officers out on those streets of that ward twice a year, in specific areas probably, telling you they're going to be there, sticking a leaflet down the doors, and actually telling you to come out and talk to them and start having an engagement and a conversation. One of the most remarkable things, I came back onto the council last May, but one of the most remarkable projects I've seen is something that's been going on in Old Malden, which is actually around public health, which is where officers of the council are actually knocking on doors and talking to people. Now, you may think that's not particularly remarkable, but actually, I think it's a real stride forward, because actually it gives them the opportunity then to introduce that elderly person who they've discovered behind that door, who they've got concerns about. They can knock on the next door neighbour's door and say, will you keep an eye, or will you look after? So that's the type of relationship we've got to have. I'm not John Major, I have to say. I don't believe in maids on bicycles cycling around whilst there's cricket being played on fields, but that type of relationship which we used to have as a community is where we've got to try and get back to, because financially I have to have it happen, but actually personally I really believe it's important.
Get in trouble now by asking Andy, the lead for engagement, if there's anything you wanted to add.
Sorry, I talked too much.
On that.
Hi guys. The other thing I'd add is we're currently reviewing consultation process, because I think everyone will agree that you're either not consulted or you're over consulted. So there's a piece of work going on at the moment which is going to neighbourhoods next week, where we're asking for comment on looking at the consultation process. So I think before now it's something like 144 pages of rules on how to engage people and consult, which is quite frankly ridiculous. And people just don't know how to engage with it, and officers don't know how to engage with people in that structure. So one of the things we're looking into is how to streamline that and make it better. And there's a piece of work, as again, just coming to neighbourhood for comment. The other thing is email addresses. It's a lot harder to get people's response when you put out a letter, because over the years we put out so many letters that people throw them away or they don't engage. The amount of consultations which have come back and responses are in the 1%, the 4%, the 5%, and you can't really make decisions on that. So one of the things that we really need to get hold of is people's email addresses, because apart from an officer's time in sending out that email, you can just reply on the phone or whatever, so you can get a lot of responses that way. So that's something which we're definitely looking into and actually modernising the way we consult. So I think, going to what Terry was saying and Kevin's been saying about, consulting you, having you respond to us and talking to you, I think that's a really big part of it.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
And obviously, I know, Kevin, you mentioned about the webs. You said you're not that keen on your website, although it has improved recently. But just keen to, the digital channel in conjunction with the other methods of communicating in conjunction, that's an important word to say, is very powerful. We certainly in my street, we use Facebook now to communicate with the residents, and it's very, very powerful, and it works. Not for everyone. But I'm just keen to understand your sort of plans, your thinking around the digital transformation that you need to go through.
So, as a council, I think we have access to, I think it's about 80,000 email addresses. Now, legally, I think we can only actually email 8,000 of those people, because over the years we haven't, put a disclaimer to say, can we come back to you on a completely different issue? So actually, we need to look into how we gather emails. I think from every piece of literature which goes out, or any form of engagement with you, we need to say, if you have an email, can we come back to you on a separate issue? In terms of channels, I think there is a huge piece of work there to be done on different digital channels. Some people use Twitter, some people use Facebook. Not everyone looks at Twitter, so you can't tweet out. You've got to, it's basically all about seeing where people are and actually going to them. The lady over there spoke about young people. Well, yeah, there are a lot of young people. We need to engage them. Not everyone's going to read a letter which you send out. So there is a huge piece of work to be done there. It's an ongoing process. The communications team are doing a really good job of kind of looking into that from a project-by-project basis and a channel-by-channel basis, and seeing what's working. We're finding that the Kingston Conversation is seeming to work, but as you quite rightly can see around the room, it's not hitting the young demographic. So we need to think about how we can engage with them. So it's an ongoing process. Feel free to throw things at us, and we take it on board.
Okay, thanks for that. It'd be really helpful to us actually at the bottom of these forms. If you put your email address on there, and you can tick a box saying, yeah, if you're doing anything more like this, or anything that's involving decision making, and you want to get involved, if we've got your permission to contact you, you're obviously interested because you're here tonight. We can follow that up. There's a gentleman at the back who's been waiting. There's a gentleman at the back who's been waiting ages. I think you've had a question. I'd like to take some others. I will come back to you if that's quite all right. Thank you. You've been waiting ages.
Hi there. I'm Simon Jakeman. I'm a proud born and raised Kingstonian. I've also had the honour of serving as a frontline firefighter for 20 years, and I serve at Surbiton. My question is, surely greener streets is everyone's responsibility. Cuts on street recycling, such as the bins, what have now gone, will cost the earth. If we don't start doing stuff like this, I'm going to be one of the guys what's out on the front line with the floods, the storms, the wildfires. Can we have the recycling bins back on the street rather than just landfill ones? Because if we don't, the next generation will blame us.
Hi, Simon. I know that I've already spoken to you once before about some of the ones in my area of New Malden High Street, where we have recycling, or we had recycling bins on the High Street. And I spoke to, obviously working out the cost factors, we have problems of financing. And then when you speak to the people who are collecting those pods along the high street, 100% of those pods were going straight into a landfill because they were contaminated. And as soon as, you know, the position that they were in, they were getting something from McDonald's in one, tins in another, and it was just a complete mess and not able to sort out that in the system that we've got. So the whole lot was going to landfill, which is a waste of our resources, which clearly we have difficulty with finances, so we've got to be very careful. And I know I've spoken to you about it, so we'll obviously look at any possible way to increase recycling. So that's probably about as much as I can say on that at the moment.
If China can do their bit, because they are actually acting on climate, surely Kingston can do something. It sends out a great message to everyone. We just need different bins. If we can look at that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure, definitely. And obviously, like I was saying earlier, about everybody working together. Because some of the placement of those bins, like where they're placed in supermarkets, people make a direct trip to go to the supermarket to put their recycling in, and those ones are very reliable. But when it comes to on a high street in various locations, they just get contaminated, and then we have big issues. So it's going to take everybody to help us to be able to put those recycling bins all over the place. But at the moment, the ones that are specific where people travel to do work. So thanks, Simon.
There's a lady in blue that's had a hand up.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Maria Wise and I live in Kingston. Going back to a couple of moments ago about the elderly, we have had a lot of cuts in Kingston for the elderly, mainly sheltered housing, where we've lost a lot of the wardens. They've all been completely halved and quartered. It's costing the NHS via Kingston a lot more in ambulances, etc., and fire brigade coming out, which if the warden had been there, it would have been solved immediately. And can I ask one direct question? Is it in the council's interest or thoughts that they're selling the social housing to Housing Trust? Please? That's the rumour that's been going around.
Sure, I can deal with that. Let me deal with that latter bit first, it's quite important. So for those who aren't aware, there's a project currently going on about how we manage and run our social housing. What used to happen with social housing is that there was a thing called stock transfer, which meant that the council took all of its stock that it owned and actually transferred it across into a housing association. Kingston tried, well, it actually tried 3 times. It only ever went to the vote twice to transfer its stock to a housing association. And the residents who have the say in that decided that they didn't want that to happen. What's currently being proposed is not that, because that would require us to do a proper ballot, and it was a much, much longer legal process. The current proposal is that, and it's not a proposal that's come from us, it was a proposal given to us by the Kingston Federation of Resident Associations. So we've agreed with them to explore it and to see what happens. But the proposal that's currently there is that the residents then form, in a sense, the housing trust, and they themselves have the majority on that to run the housing as they see fit. Councillors would still have to be on it because the council would still own the housing. It's not being transferred, it's not being sold off, none of that is happening whatsoever. Still owned by the council. The responsibility legally still sits with the council. It's really about who manages that stock and a view that residents should be empowered much more to get involved in that. There are some examples of it working in some places, and we just have to see what comes out of the consultation around that issue. On the issue of sheltered housing, I'm aware of the wardens being removed from, I think, all of sheltered housing now, although some of them had already lost it, so it's actually a sort of transformation process that's been going on. I'm not aware, because I haven't seen any figures on this, I have to be honest with you, about fire brigade or ambulances being called out in excess of what was before. But I will take your name and I'll happily go and check it. I don't have the figures, but I'm more than happy to investigate it for you. Yeah. Our priority as a council is to stop people going into hospital. Hospitals are dangerous places with sharp needles and drugs, and we should be preventing people as much as we possibly can get into hospital, because as soon as you go into that cycle of care in a hospital, you increase the likelihood of that person's life being shortened, and we mustn't do that. So if there is evidence of it, then I'm more than happy to talk to you about it, but I say I don't have any figures around that.
Okay, Joe?
Good evening. I wanted to pose a question about a service which I've been asking for about 6 years. You remember I came from Kew Gardens, where I was disabled in Kew Gardens, and they used to pick up my rubbish for free, you know, the old freezer and all that kind of stuff. Here, they don't want to do it. You remember Osborne, you know, last leader. He was good, but he put it on to Rachel Sherman or something, who became Rachel something else when she married. She then sat on it for about 4 years or something like that. I mean, it was dumped in her lap, and then she sat on it, so to speak. So I think it would be fair and equal if this service existed. I can't see it as being an expensive thing, but what I can see is that there are lots of boroughs who have this facility, and it doesn't cost very much money. You have to consider that these are people who can't move things by themselves, okay? And they're, you know, they've got medication and all this kind of thing. They're poor, because the scheme is only intended for people who don't have any money, you know, on benefits and all that kind of thing. And, you know, like disabled people, we often feel as if people are passing us by in the crowd, and we damn well hope that someone's going to stop and shine a light on us and say hello in there, you know. If you don't do it, I couldn't possibly imagine what could be the outcome. But I would call it heartless. There's no two ways about that. You know, at the moment they charge 30 quid for removing things. Well, that's fine for people who've got 30, 40,000 pounds a year. But when you're on benefits, you know, that kind of 30 quid means a lot. Plus, they've still got to get the freezer to the door or something kind of thing like that. So at the moment, forget about Rachel. She's head of place or something, Patent Place probably. And yeah, well, it was a soap opera, and she believe me, she's a soap opera herself.
I just, sorry, I've got one.
I haven't finished.
I know, I do apologise.
Stand down.
I've one eye on the.
Stand down.
I have one eye on the clock.
You will let me finish.
I will let you finish. I'm just
Then
reminding you I have one eye
Then
on
be
the clock.
done.
Because I have a duty to these people.
You have a duty, and I have a duty to come here and speak.
So
I didn't come here for fun, so I'll be finished.
Not to hear me, but do please ask your question. Thank you.
I think I've got the question. So only speak if I summarise it incorrectly. You're asking, I think, why it is that we can't have some form of big waste collection like we do for taking away beds and freezers. That's free for disabled people. I have to say I have no idea why we don't do that. I mean, I don't know myself. I'm more than happy to go and look at it.
The situation now, Mr. Davis, forget about it, you might. But the situation now is the council deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But the only problem is, no one damn well knows about this open secret. So let's open it out.
Okay, well, let me... Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. Let me take it away. I mean, obviously, I want to be clear. I mean, part of our function is that we're actually in a bit of a hole financially, so we don't want to keep adding more things into cost. But I'm more than happy to go and have a look at it and see what we can do about it. And if well, there's another hour to go. Yeah, we'll see how we go on before the end of it, before you make a judgment. Yeah, okay. Well.
So from the person of integrity, back to me. Thank you, sir. I do. As I said at the outset, Jonathan Dimbleby does this with panache, and I'll never get there. And I take all feedback, and I've taken yours, sir. Next question. Lady over there. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Linda Shackley. I live round the corner. I live in central Surbiton. I'm just following on from sorry, I don't know your name, the firefighter, your comment about recycling. Simon, thank you. I slightly take issue with something I think Terry said earlier, which was we live in a fairly clean borough, but we would obviously like it to be pristine. I would certainly say in central Surbiton it's a pretty filthy borough, and I find it quite a disgrace, actually. I don't like even bringing people into the area because it is so filthy. And I think you kind of don't help yourselves with the recycling solution that we have in the area, because obviously we have the open, I don't know what you call them, containers, where you have foxes coming into them, rummaging through the recycling, and litter gets everywhere, and obviously bits and pieces blow all over the place. So I don't think you help yourselves with that. So my question is, what are your plans? You've talked about changing the recycling. What are your plans with regard to that, and how do you think that will improve the general litter situation? Thank you.
Yeah, the litter is a difficult problem. I mean, you learn. I mean, part of this whole process is to learn things. I don't say that I've got all the answers, but I'm happy to listen and to learn what other people have said. And it is quite interesting, actually. The very first of these these discussions, which we've been having, the conversations, there was a resident who, I think she was the first person to ask a question that completely floored me, which was, why was it that we sent the street cleaner around her street every week on a Monday, and then we sent the bin men round on a Tuesday and put litter all over the place? Why didn't we send them on a Wednesday? Now, I have no answer to that, because it's a ridiculous thing that we do that. So we need to look at that. And this is part of what the process is. When it comes to the recycling scheme, the things that are relevant to that, because recycling is a complicated issue. The things that are relevant that you're asking about, this sort of issue about litter, is that this current scheme that we've got does involve, I'm going to call them operatives, but they does involve operatives taking your green bin and traipsing it across the road to the recycling lorry and then sorting it out into whatever way they want to recycle it at that point. Now, the problem with that is you're quite right, we do have a lot of open bins that are part of that process. I mean, one of the more shocking things that I discovered, and you learn so much about waste which you probably didn't ever want to know, but one of the more shocking things I discovered was that almost all of the stuff that we very, very conscientiously been recycling in the way of paper and card has been going into landfill. Because as soon as it gets slightly wet, that is it. There's no point having it for recycling. So we are going to have a closed bin for that, so that actually it will keep it dry, and that is definitely one of the advantages of it. But also, instead of taking your glass and all your tins and everything else and the other bits that fly all over the place, the plastic, to the lorry, what will now happen in future, and this is one of the cost savings, is that a single operative will go down the street with what they call a slave bin, which is a big bin, and they'll go and collect it directly from your green box. There'll be no moving it across the street. It'll be emptied into that slave bin, and then after every, I don't know how many houses, it could be a dozen, I don't really know, but however many houses it is, that bin will then be taken to the lorry and emptied into it properly. So we are expecting that will solve some of this problem. We also obviously need to look at our street cleaning regime and about when it does come along streets and actually do it. The issue which I think Terry was raising, which is more about the enforcement scheme which we're putting in place, because there is still an issue about litter in the streets. It is something, I mean, I remember as a kid, was it Keep Britain Tidy campaigns that used to happen? And we seemed to stop them, but for some reason there was still litter, we just stopped doing them. Well, in a sense, this is kind of reimagining that, because we all have a responsibility in this whole new world where we don't have any money to actually try and contribute to making the place better. But where there are people who are prepared to litter, we are then putting in enforcement officers on the street to find them. And it covers a very small range. We're in trial at the moment, but it covers a very small range of issues like it's cigarette butts, chewing gum, dog fouling, urination, because believe it or not, in some places in the borough, there is a problem with urination in the street. So there's a range of those. When we've got through that trial period, we're going to review it and say what other things are there that we could encompass within that. And it could be about skips, it could be about all sorts of other environmental fines. Now, we don't want to issue fines. And actually, to be honest with you, this is one of those times where I can happily say that unlike penalty charge notices for parking, I don't make any money out of these fines, because that fine is merely there to pay the operatives to do the actual enforcement officers to carry out the fining of people. So if we can get rid of that, great. But we've got to really focus on it, because in this new world, we're not going to have the money to do the street cleansing in the way that we want to do it, and this is going to have to be the future.
Okay, I want to... Yeah, please go ahead, Terry.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add one point on there, because on the 10th of November, you'll have your neighbourhood conversation in Dysart School, and obviously all people are invited, everyone's invited, and the theme there is for smarter streets. So if you can come along to that and pass on your views about particular problems, because we don't know about everything, every part of the borough. So if you come along to that and let us know, then it can be looked at. So thank you.
Okay, it's 8:20. I did say some of you have come along tonight because you want to talk to councillors on a one-to-one basis. Can I just have a quick show of hands if you want this to carry on for another 10 minutes or so? We can carry it on for 10 minutes or so if the few people have still got some questions. We'll try and get through as many of those as we can. Let's just go. Let's take 2 or 3 points at once if we can. So.
David Newman from New Malden. There seems to be a tendency as the years go by for central government to keep dumping more and more responsibilities on the local authorities, but not always with the money to do them. Is there any future in pushing back a bit and unloading some responsibilities so that some of these things don't have to be done?
Okay, what are you thinking of that, the gentleman there? And a third one?
Good evening, everybody. Following on from the fireman and this young lady here about the litter, I agree with this lady 100%. The streets in Surbiton are an absolute disgrace. And a lot of it's due, I think, as to the takeaway food outlets. Because if you walk down Surbiton High Street, Victoria Road, in the morning, it's just a complete carpet of cardboard and food containers. It's disgraceful. And as far as I can see, as a person walking around the town, there's never anybody with a broom sweeping up. We get a truck come through with one of those spinning wheels in the curb, and it sweeps the curbstones. But the litter's not in the road. The litter's on the pavement. So you need a man with a broom to brush the rubbish into the road before the truck comes along. Now, I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, is there a third question? Oh, gentleman just behind you, Joe. Okay, feels like we're getting to the end of this.
Roy Stenland. I have a question about sporting facilities in the borough, and I have a big concern. I actually am involved in a sporting facility in Berrylands, which I think you're aware of, the tennis club. And we've been trying to work with the council to look at the local parks, so the tennis courts in the local parks and the sporting facilities. We've been trying to do that for about 8 or 9 years, and these facilities are deteriorating rapidly. You've got no money to invest in them, and I think there's local businesses and other clubs that could possibly get involved.
You expect me to respond to those 3? Okay, fine. Let me start at the top, New Malden, responsibilities. Yeah, government's pretty sly at this stuff, though. You know, they always have a bit of sleight of hand over it. So what they do is they announce with great aplomb that we're going to delegate a function to a local authority, and they do that. And they give us a load of money to go and do that particular responsibility. Then a couple of years down the line, they say, oops, we need the money back, thanks. But you can still carry on doing what you're doing. It's great, but we'll have the money back. We obviously do try to push back against some of this. There's always government initiatives in some shape or form that they'll always want to push, and projects which any government of any colour will always have that it wants to see us try and deliver on their behalf. What we're trying to do at the moment, and we've actually not got into discussion about this evening, actually, interestingly enough, but local government finance is one of the least entertaining things you will ever have to come into contact with if you're a councillor. It's not particularly transparent. It's a very odd system. But basically, our spending is made up of three lots of money, in essence. There are a few others, but three lots of money. The first is council tax. Now, council tax, we set that, we collect it, and we spend it. So we have complete autonomy over the council tax. Council tax is it's over 50% of what we spend as a council. The second is business rates. Now, business rates accounts for, business rates, what happens is we don't set it. Government sets a multiplier. We collect it all. We only keep 30%. We give 20% to the mayor and 50% goes off to central government, roughly, in those figures. We then have an RSG, which is the Revenue Support Grant, which is the bit that government gives all local authorities. Now that is, in essence, if we want to put it in these terms, it's not quite straightforward, but it's the redistribution of the rest of the money we gave up through the business rates, in essence. And some poorer local authorities tend to get more than we do. Our problem is that government has now decreed that that RSG is going off a cliff, and it's going off very fast. So although we have held council tax and not increased it, so even those rising costs, and okay, inflation's low, and even though we are attracting more businesses to come to Kingston because we recognise more businesses means more income, it does mean that our RSG is still declining very, very fast, which is where all that cut that we talk about comes from. So when you say push back, what we are having a debate with them over at the moment is a new settlement for Kingston, which is that I just hand all back all that money they gave us. Give the whole lot back. The whole revenue support grant, just take it away, because it's a pain, because it's only going one way and I can't do anything about it. And in return, I've asked them to uplift our business rates to about 54% that we would retain. If they gave us that in year one, we'd have the same money as the RSG, which is appealing to the Treasury. In subsequent years, as we're more successful at attracting business, there's more incentive for us to attract good businesses into Kingston, then we'll actually see increased income. And to give you an idea of figures, if we were to just stay as we are now, over the next 3 years, we've got to save about £27 million, something of that order out of our budget. If we went down this route, it'd be 10. So we'd have a real opportunity to be independent from them, responsible for our own future, and able to be a bit more creative about the way we raise money. That was that one. Streets and services. Look, all I can say is I completely agree with you. We've obviously got to look at what goes on in the street sweeping regime, because that's, you know, if there is an issue about takeaway food outlets, there's always an issue about takeaway food outlets. But if we're not cleaning the mess in the morning, then there's obviously something that's got to be looked at. And I think we need to take that away and have a look at that and look at the timing of street sweeping in that context. Sports facilities.
Sorry, I just wanted to say something. Would it not be the responsibility of those people who are kicking out all the cardboard and the styrofoam and so on and so forth to do something about it themselves? We're talking about McDonald's, for example. They've been chastised about this before, about all that packaging and so on and so forth. I think you can get done for free by these people. You don't have to spend any money.
Well, we can look at...
So behave yourselves, get your act together, let's have a decent borough. Otherwise, we'll tell everyone what a bunch of rotters you are.
We can look at that. I mean, we can apply pressure to make them clean up outside their own shops. I mean, we can try and doing that. But, I mean, ultimately, this isn't about the retailers, because the retailer at that point sold it. And it's therefore, takes a disclaimer. It's no longer they're no longer their responsibility. No, maybe we need to challenge them, and maybe that's something we should take up. Sporting facilities. I do classify sporting facilities in what I spoke about earlier in the context of growth. That if there's got to be more houses, we need more parks. We also need more sports facilities, because otherwise we're going to become. I don't know if anybody's watched. There's a wonderful film about this whole world that everybody suddenly becomes so fat they have to go into space because it's the only way they can actually support themselves. Otherwise they collapse and die. And I don't think we want to be that type of world. And so I think sporting facilities in this context now is one of the biggest challenges in public health terms for tackling obesity. And that does mean we're going to have to look at what we do with all of our existing swimming pools, which are tired, and how can we leverage in more money to make them better, and how can we increase the range of sports facilities there are. Didn't happen in my time, but one of the more, I mean, this is maybe something from a tennis perspective you'll find amusing. There's a tennis court in New Malden, which I'm trying to remember which road it's on, and which it's Blagdon Road sort of area, where for some reason, I can only presume the council at some point in its life took the decision it wanted to save money. Instead of having a net, has actually just got a fence that you hit the ball backwards and forwards over. It's a rigid steel fence. Beverley Park, there you go, exactly, that's where it is. And I look at that every time I go past that on the train thinking, what were we thinking? But anyway, very valid point. It's really important.
Anyone who hasn't asked a question like to do so? The final couple of questions before we break out. Now the hands are going up. There's two over there and two over there, three over there. Right, let's rattle through these.
Quick question, Brian Parsons, Surbiton. What can be done about the misuse of disabled parking spaces? I'm not disabled, but I frequently drive someone with a blue badge, and it does my head in when I have to do a 1 kilometre circle. When I stop, I see a car, no blue badge. There is nothing you can do if you've got a disabled person you want to park. There's nothing you can do. You go away. What can I do? What can you do?
Is there someone in here somewhere? Yeah.
Yes, so it's Peter Rossington, Surbiton resident. I guess most of the conversations have been about the pressure on current services, but at the beginning you painted that picture of maybe 20,000 more homes. I think that was by 2050. And so it creates a rather sort of daunting picture of how we deal with more people, how we deal with the infrastructure, the amenities, and everything in our lifestyle. So I'm just wondering if you had a picture or a strategic vision that you could give us of what Kingston Surbiton would look like over the next few years and how we deal with all that.
And then just a couple of quick ones here to complete the... Thanks.
We've been given a lot of money for cycling in the borough, but it doesn't seem to be being spent. So is there a reason for the delay?
And the gentleman behind you.
Yeah, it follows on really. Can there be any kind of education or more distinct cycle lanes, because people just walk in them all the time really, and it's not really clear sometimes what is a cycle lane and what is a pedestrian way.
The final one is 5 here, and then we'll break.
Oh, I was just going to mention aircraft noise. It seems to be a lot more in Surbiton now.
Okay, thank you for keeping those questions brief. Kevin and the team.
I'm not... Disabled parking, I wasn't quite sure what the question was. Were you saying you have a problem finding a disabled parking bay, or you keep finding people in it who aren't disabled or don't have a blue badge? Is that...
So to avoid any confusion, the spaces are there, they're accessible, but they're full with people who are driving without a disabled badge.
Right. Okay. Well, we should be...
And when I ring the council, I get sort of vague responses. I don't know what to do when I'm in that situation. But if you're driving with somebody, you can't do very much other than keep going, miss the appointment, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can't double park while you tap on an empty car and ask them to move.
No, I agree. I don't know the answer to that, and I think maybe we need to take that away as an issue and investigate it a bit further, because I'm not quite sure. Obviously, if there's an enforcement officer around, then they can be ticketed for that, and that something's available to them if it is a marked disabled bay on a roads. But I mean, I don't know the specific answer, so I can look at it and we can come back to you. If we're catching all this detail down, but if you can leave your name, then we can actually have a look at that. Homes by 2050. Well, let's put it this way: if Kingston in infrastructure terms is the same as it is today in 2050, and we've got that number of people additional living here, then it is going to be a place that I don't want to be honest with you, and I don't think anybody else in this room would want to be. There is no option that says there has to be no change, because I think we're going to have to look at it. When it comes to big picture stuff, whenever it comes to conversations I have with both the Mayor and the Treasury about infrastructure, because that's really what this is fundamentally about. The response you always get from government at the moment is that if you want money spent on infrastructure, you've got to give us something back for it. Do not expect that you're going to get a lot of money put into the railway network, for example, to relieve the current overcrowding on the trains. It really is very difficult to attract investment for that, because the Treasury's response is, look, I've got loads of demands, seems to be coping. Maybe it's a bit crowded, but we're coping. So any infrastructure we want to put in place has to be accompanied by some form of commitment that from the community, not just from the council, the community, that they're prepared to accept house building alongside that. And so that's something we're going to have to look at very carefully. The most informative way you can look at this is if you look at it in the context of what's called Crossrail 2. Now, Crossrail 2 it's Crossrail 2. Crossrail goes east to west. Crossrail 2 is going to go north to south. So the idea is we're going to be able to get on a train from here to go to Hertfordshire. You'll get in places like Surbiton and Kingston, at least a doubling of the existing service that you've got there. Instead of going to Waterloo, it will go Victoria, Tottenham Court Road, through London, and then actually straight out to Hertfordshire. So that will change the dynamic quite considerably. And what it does mean is that where the Crossrail 2 lands, it's likely that you're going to be expected to build some form of housing. We don't know the scale of it, but that's reality. Where does that land? Well, it does land in Kingston. I don't think Kingston can sustain a lot of housing, certainly not to compete with the 20,000 that was mentioned. I don't think it can do that. I don't think Surbiton has the ability to generate enormous numbers of houses. I just don't see it. You just look around, I don't see it. I think there's probably only one site that potentially could have housing on it, and that's the current car park alongside the station owned by Network Rail. But even then, you'd have to re-provide parking to accommodate that. Tolworth is clearly a hot spot. There's lots of opportunities which actually even at the moment are around that area, some of which are popular, some of which are very, very unpopular. And I think there's a debate about what will happen in Tolworth. It's also the case that Chesington could potentially be another area where we'll see some housing. My view about Chesington is slightly different, though. I'm not absolutely sure that a lot of housing is going to get built in Chesington, because where I'm having conversations at the moment is saying that actually the housing can be in the districts, because about 40% of the people who work in London don't live in London, they commute in. And if we can find a way of reaching infrastructure across the Greenbelt rather than building on it, across the Greenbelt to support development in other parts of Surrey and the districts, then there's a much better chance that Crossrail will be generating the sort of housing need it is, but not with us and not on the Greenbelt. So that's a debate which we are having, and there's a plan being drawn up to look at how we can accommodate that. That's all fine. So we've got houses, we've got infrastructure. But what type of place is Kingston? What's the vision for it? Well, look, the reason that people come and live here is because it is an absolutely fantastic place to live. I mean, I know that a lot of us don't ever go around in London very much, and we don't ever go to many other boroughs. But when you look at the uniqueness of Kingston, the fact is that it's incredible history. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. You know, this is the place where the kings of England were crowned before they built Westminster Abbey. You know, the first king of England was crowned in this borough. It's a fantastic, rich, rich history. Great centre of history, that medieval marketplace and the church and the river. First river, the only river crossing apart from London Bridge for a great long time. Hugely important. Massive commercial centre. It's retail driven, admittedly, but it's the second largest outside the West End. You know, that is hugely important to us. And then you go the river, the university, the Crown Courts. You've even got rolling fields down in south of the borough. I mean, you might not believe it up in Surbiton, but when we held one of these down there, they want to talk about ditch cutting. You know, who'd have thought that in Kingston? You could put a wall around the whole of Kingston, actually just make it its own. Well, it's not going to become papal city, so I'm not the Pope, but I mean, you know, it could actually have its own vibrancy, its own sustainability, and that's what makes it a fantastic place. Now, whatever we do, and this is the challenge for all of us, whatever we do about building homes, putting in infrastructure, is we mustn't lose that, because that's the bit that makes this the place that I want to live, and I've brought my kids up in, and I hope every one of you wants to stay in as well.
All of the questions? All answered? Yep.
Cycling.
I think there was a couple
Sorry.
more.
Do you want to do cycling?
Yeah, cycling is one of the parts coming under my portfolio now, and I take the gentleman's point that it does appear to as if you can't see what's happening. Since I've taken it over, and a lot of the groundwork has been done building up to where we are now. The Portsmouth Road is going to be the first scheme which will be coming in. Work on announcements on that's going to be very soon now. But we're very keen on making sure that we don't put schemes in that we can't tie up to other cycle routes outside the borough. So a lot of that's going to be worked on, and it's going to be Portsmouth Road, Kingston Hill, it's going to be in Tolworth, it's going to be in New Malden. So these areas are all going to be designed to link up. It's obviously very, very important that we have the full infrastructure ready, and obviously for the environment as well, and also safe routes. So we're looking at that very, very strongly at the moment. So I hope that answers. Otherwise, come and see me afterwards and I'll talk to you a bit more.
Just finally on aircraft noise. The council's long-term position has been on Heathrow expansion is we've been part of something called the 2M group. Don't worry about it, but it's a group of local authorities, and the strategy has always been about Heathrow. It should be better, not bigger. Recently, we've slightly taken a slightly different stance, and that's really to suggest that on balance we'd prefer if Gatwick was expanded. Now that's been taken on the basis that actually I think we can possibly derive more Kingston infrastructure and money out of Gatwick than we could out of Heathrow, because if anybody goes down the south of the borough, the A243 that goes through Hook and through Chesington is probably the most difficult road we've got to deal with in Kingston. It's even more complicated in some respects than getting around the town centre. And we're focused on the idea that if Gatwick was to win an extra runway, most of south and southwest London would probably pile through the A243. And therefore it would be more sensible for us to try and attract infrastructure, because there is a design to redesign the whole of Junction 9 and the M25 to us to try and support what we're doing on the 243 as part of that. So we've never really taken a completely one side or the other, but it's been kind of on the basis that on balance it would be preferable for Gatwick only from an investment perspective.
Thank you. Right, we're now moving into the Meet the Councillors stage of the evening. So I've been walking around all night. Your turn now to stand up, stretch. We've got the ward councillors, the panel, and we've been joined also by Councillor John Tolley from Grove Ward. So thank you all for working with me this evening to get those questions across. Thanks to the panel, but most of all, thanks very much to you for coming this evening. Thank you.